is the beginning of my literacy notebook. It is the first day that we had in class, and we talked about getting students to love to read and comprehension overall, and the areas that encompass that, such as fluency, vocab, and phonics. And then the biggest takeaway from this day was if students are not looking at the word, they are not reading the word. And that motivation is key. Kids need oral language development, and they also need the desire to read. And then we had to read Teachers Make the Difference, where reading achievement varies because of the quality of teaching. Teachers need to constantly be up to date with best practices because everyone wants their student to be with a good teacher and to actually learn. And then we had a Rutzel and Cooter reading, and we talked about phonology, orthography, morphology, syntax and semantics, and pragmatics. And it went over all of that. And then we went into the developmental stages of oral language development and the relationship between oral language development and reading. And they said that oral language development is one of the key predictors in reading success. So if you have weak oral language, you will be a weak reader, basically. And then they talked about assessments, and then the biggest takeaway from that reading was teachers need to know the steps in developing oral language so that they can foster this learning and comprehension because, as we said, it is one of the biggest predictors of success. And then we read about reading rockets, shared readings, and we went through all of that, the materials you need and how to do it and the process, the before, during, and after. And then it continues. And my biggest takeaway from that was knowing what to do before, during, and after shared reading is important, as well as knowing how to extend the activities in that process. Because it's one thing knowing how to do it, but then using TPTs to help these shared readings so that your students are looking and engaged and participating so that you know that they are actually learning. Then we have class notes from February 1st. We talked a lot about print, concepts about print, as well as shared reading more. So we learned a lot more, and we talked about, we had a collective definition of shared reading, as well as strategies to incorporate into your shared reading processes. And then my three biggest takeaways were that when I'm a teacher, I want to always use TPTs, and the music book activity I want to remember because it was a new activity that I hadn't heard of, and it seemed like it was very useful for the students. And then we talked about the ILA phonemic awareness position paper, so we went in depth into phonemic awareness and how it's segmenting and blending sounds and all that stuff. And then the biggest takeaway from that is phonemic awareness is basically just phonics in the dark. And then we had the minority view paper. And then we went to Rutzel and Cooter again on February 9th. And this was all about emergent literature. Again, print concepts, phonemic awareness, assessing phonemic awareness and knowing those assessments to get letter names and sounds, and how to teach phonemic and phonological awareness. So we went into the different activities that could be used for both, the different ones. And then the biggest takeaway is that phonemic awareness is being able to manipulate sounds in words, while phonological awareness is hearing and changing loud sounds inside of words. And then we came to class on February 8th, and this is where we talked about phonological and phonemic awareness again, and all those activities that we read about, and a little bit of phonics as well. again, these activities. And then we had to do how do you know that students need phonemic awareness? And it's all about first being able to assess it, knowing those different types of assessments. Because if it's already developed, they do not need to be taught it again. So you can screen students, and then you focus on blending and segmenting sounds, and you can do these do this during shared reading activities. I like personally to use music and movement with my students, so you could sing songs that require them to change like the beginning letter sounds in the words, and it could be silly, like changing the first letter in your name, and it's a song that you sing your name. So, and now, oops, there we go. And then we talked about more decoding and more so for phonics and the different types of words, such as digraphs, diphthongs, schwas, and just word patterns and rhyming and onsets. And then we also talked about assessments on how to figure out if students are understanding these concepts. And then they gave us strategies for teaching phonics. And my biggest takeaway is that there are key terminology that helps teach students specific letter combinations like schwa and diphthongs, because I was aware of them, but I wasn't very good at remembering what they were and knowing the different types of words. And then we talked about spelling, which I knew that students needed inventive spelling, so that they needed kin writing, and they needed to practice sounding out words, stretching the words, and making them so that they hear the different sounds in words. But I was very surprised that there were different like morphological and orthographic knowledge, such as knowing where words come from, and then knowing parts of words, such as like the suffix and the prefix and all that stuff, to help them learn how to spell, because you can't just solely spell by stretching out the word. You have to know these other areas. So spelling is much more than simply sounding out words, because they need morphologic and orthographic knowledge. And then during class, we talked about our challenging readers and graphemes and all that stuff. So my biggest takeaway was we need to use all 5 phonics instructions in our own classroom. The synthetic phonics instruction, embedded instruction, analogy-based instruction, analytic instruction, and then phonics through spelling. And I didn't know about those. And then we watched all those videos, the short vowel sounds, Mommy E videos, which probably was my favorite. I liked learning about Mommy E because I've never seen somebody try to teach that before. Reading multisyllabic words and breaking those words down. And then we went into fluency and how students need the theory of automaticity, where students can input letters or words in the mind, but it's limited because they shift between decoding words and then comprehending words. So it just needs to be automatic. So, and then how to assess for if you're having an effective fluency instruction with your students. More notes. And then my takeaway was that as teachers, the students should chart their fluency so they can see and feel like they are in control of their own learning and that they are improving and they are fluently reading. They need to feel like they're doing it, not just the teacher. And if they can chart that, they can really see that they're improving, which is a little motivation for them. And then we talked about the Daily 5 for what students do and what teachers do and the structure of it, and how to set that up in your classroom. We watched videos, and my takeaway is that we need to use Daily 5 and conference with each student so that they know what their goal is and what they're working on for that day, so that everyone's on the same page. And then we went to Rootsel and Cooter about having the motivation to read, they need to pick different genres and be on their level, and just having that choice but clear instructions that they have the choice but and then get that reward of reading it. So the takeaways, they mentioned using a chart that students color in to track the different genres that they were reading because they're picking their books, and using that chart just shows them which genres they've read, which ones they still need to read, and so it gives them that choice, but it keeps them motivated as well. Then we went into Rutzel's assessment chapter, so many different screening assessments and diagnostic assessments and progressive monitoring, all that stuff, and the different tests like DIBELS and the TPRI and profiling with students, which is a document that you record an individual's strength or weakness, and then so we need to use reliable and valid assessments so that students can see what they can do, but also what they can do, which is important. And then we had an asynchronous class on 316, I believe, and we had to do a fluency concept map and connect all of our words. And then we talked more about the daily 5. So before letting students choose their activities, make sure to have a check-in or conference so every student knows where they are at for that day and they're not behind. Then we read about the different types of vocabulary and how to help them develop that vocabulary. And then we went into the screening of that, so this is just continued of it in that chapter. Different fluencies and vocabulary, knowing that stuff. So vocabulary knowledge predicts success, so we need to be using strategies that develop this vocabulary in students. Then we went into reading comprehension and the key components in comprehension, as well as how to assess comprehension, and then effective instruction and how do we teach that, and then different activities that we can do to help us as teachers. So reading comprehension happens when we activate prior knowledge and connect text to what we know. If students aren't understanding beforehand, they're not going to learn this. They're not going to understand because they don't know some of the vocabulary or the context in which we're talking about. And then we had 4 practical principles, which was a takeaway as teachers need to vary instruction that presents words in different contexts to expose them to new meanings and to too many exposures to words. We need to connect these words to prior knowledge and have all students practice and review the words. And then why read-alouds matter. Instead of starting with half literature and half nonfiction that steadily increases over time, teachers need to continue to use literature during read-alouds because it develops that academic language that children need to understand the nonfiction books, that those words that will present themselves later. And then we have motivation in the school, so allowing our students just the ability to choose books that will motivate them in itself. And then if they're motivated to read, they'll read more and thereby become better readers. And then we have the ILO statement talking about emergency literacy skills again, not emergency. So after reading the many benefits of read-alouds, it's very clear that teachers should use them in their instruction and with older kids too, not just in the younger grades. And then we have the Allington article where what was wrong per se, what we learned from research, and that now we know that students need to read appropriate text for their level and move away from worksheets that work on just one skill with these struggling readers, and they should be working with experts and not just paraprofessionals in one-on-ones or small groups. Then we had a writer's notebook and just allowing students to write throughout the day what they're thinking and feeling and observations, just having that creativity, and let kids have that writer's journal so that they can write whenever whatever thoughts they have during the day and then play with the language. And that's how they'll start to learn. Also, we need to use mentor texts because students need examples to look at during the writing process, not just before, and then compare their work to others and learn how to write and how to change some of these things. And we also talked about writing conferences where students get organized, or teachers are organized, so we can set up individual writing conferences to make sure that we're working on everyone's goals and making sure that students know what they're working on. Then we had they're reading about the different traits of writing and how to develop all of these, effective instruction for teachers, how we can do shared writing, and then have a writing workshop. And then students need to practice the stages of writing by observing teachers talk about out loud during the writing process and engage students in interactive opportunities. And then we had Rosinski assessing fluency, which fluency is important because it bridges word decoding and comprehension and should be correctly assessed. And then at the very end, we had, oops, let me make this smaller. Let's move this. There we go. Our ELL QRG worksheet that we had the other week, which talks about how English language learners need to develop their conversational as well as academic language and use a CHATS framework, which utilizes TPTs and making sure that students are comprehending and using higher order thinking strategies, and then we're assessing them but still scaffolding their learning. So we need to make sure that our lesson plans are show that in our lesson plans. So I believe that is the end of my notebook.